Margaret Chin put her coffee mug down at 10:04 on a Wednesday morning and noticed something strange. Not hunger, not discomfort, something quieter than both. A kind of interior stillness she hadn't felt in years. The kitchen in her apartment in Portland smelled faintly of cedar from the heating vent, and the winter light came through the window at a low angle, the kind that makes dust visible in the air. She'd eaten dinner the night before around 7. She hadn't touched anything since. 14 hours. She told her sister later that it felt like someone had turned the static down. Not off, just down. Her thoughts arrived one at a time, instead of in a pile. She noticed the sound of a car moving through slush 2 floors below. She felt, for a few minutes, genuinely awake in a way that her usual breakfast hadn't given her in years. She didn't know what was happening inside her body at that moment, but something was. Here's what that something looks like, mapped carefully without drama. In the window between 12 and 16 hours without food, Margaret's liver was exhausting its glycogen stores. Insulin had dropped. A signaling molecule, YMPK, adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase, had begun to activate. Not metaphorically, physically, a cellular stress sensor firing. And when it fired, it initiated a cascade that researchers at the University of California, San Diego documented in a 2023 paper in Nature Metabolism. A cascade that begins the early stages of autophagy, the process by which cells dismantle their own damaged proteins and recycle the material. The clarity Margaret felt wasn't mood. It was her cells beginning, quietly, to clean house. She hadn't set an alarm. She hadn't followed a protocol. She'd simply woken up late, skipped her usual toast, answered some emails, and arrived at 10 a.m. to find her mind sharper than it had been in months. The sensation she was reaching for words to describe had a biological name. And that name is what this video is built around, which raises something worth sitting with before we go any deeper. If that silence, the one Margaret felt, the one you may have felt yourself on a morning when breakfast got away from you, if that silence is the body beginning to repair itself, then why does it feel like an accident when it happens? Why does it arrive uninvited, unnamed, and then get interrupted the moment someone puts food in front of you? The answer isn't simple, and this video isn't going to pretend it is. What the research is showing now, not 5 years ago, not in the simplified headline version, but in the papers coming out of longevity labs in 2024 and 2025, is that autophagy is among the most powerful biological signals the human body knows how to produce. And it remains, functionally, invisible in mainstream preventive medicine. Not because the science is weak. The science is substantial, but because the conditions that generate it are free, require no device, and can't be bottled. That's the first thing worth understanding. The second is darker and more interesting. The same cellular machinery Margaret activated by accident on a Wednesday morning in Portland is the mechanism that several pharmaceutical interventions, rapamycin among them, now studied seriously as a longevity compound, are designed to switch on artificially. The drug attempts to replicate what the fast initiates on its own. Her empty kitchen, it turns out, was doing something the labs are still trying to manufacture. This is where the video is going. Not toward a protocol, not toward a supplement stack, not toward a version of this science that's been sanded smooth for easy consumption. Toward what the research actually says about how long this process takes to begin, what accelerates it, what interrupts it, and what your body is capable of when the silence is allowed to last. The stillness Margaret felt that morning has a mechanism. Understanding that mechanism, precisely, without shortcuts, is what changes how you read everything that comes after. Your body already makes it, not a version of it, not a weaker imitation. The exact same molecule that pharmaceutical companies spent billions isolating, patenting, and loading into injection pens. Your intestinal lining synthesizes on its own, in real time, every time you adjust when you eat rather than what you eat. The mechanism is not obscure. It is not waiting on a breakthrough. It was mapped years ago, and the signal across the research is consistent. The timing of food matters to your biology in ways that dwarf the composition of the food itself. This is where the earlier question starts to close. The gut lining cells, L cells, scattered through the ileum and colon like small listening stations, respond not primarily to what arrives, but to the rhythm of arrival. When food comes on a compressed schedule, when a window is shorter, they do not just register a meal. They register a pattern. And within that pattern, they upregulate production of the very hormone that slows gastric emptying, signals the pancreas, and tells the brain, through a direct line that bypasses conscious thought, that the body is resourced and does not need to be desperate. The smell of coffee going cold on the counter without breakfast following it. That gap, that particular nothing, is actually a trigger, an input, a biological instruction the body knows how to read. The compound is glucagon-like peptide. The channels have covered that mechanism before. What the newer work reveals goes further than the molecule itself. Participants eating within a 6 to 8 hour window showed GLP-1 secretion rates statistically comparable to the low-dose pharmaceutical threshold, without the nausea, without the cost, without the dependency. But the more interesting finding was buried deeper in the data. The effect was not linear across subjects. Some people showed dramatic hormonal response. Others, running the same protocol, showed almost none. Same window, same foods, wildly different outcomes. The divergent group, the ones for whom the compressed window produced minimal hormonal response, showed uniformly elevated inflammatory markers at baseline. Not dramatically elevated, just chronically, quietly elevated. The kind of low-grade inflammation that does not show up as illness. It shows up as joints that take until mid-morning to stop aching. It shows up as a mental fog that lifts too slowly, if it lifts at all. It shows up as weight that refuses to move despite doing most things correctly. The quiet, demoralizing experience of following the rules and watching nothing happen. And here's where the research stopped, because research stops at what is measurable. But the metabolic data points somewhere the researchers could not follow. Elevated inflammatory load suppresses L cell sensitivity. The wall of the intestine becomes less responsive. The listening stations get noisier, harder to signal through. The body is not ignoring the compressed eating window. It is receiving the signal through interference, the way a radio picks up a station through static. The instruction arrives degraded. Now consider what generates that kind of chronic low-grade inflammation in adults over 45 who are not sick. The research on this is unambiguous. Psychological stress, specifically the anticipatory kind, the kind that hums beneath ordinary days without ever resolving, sustains inflammatory cytokine production at exactly the level that muddies metabolic signaling. not the cortisol spike from a real emergency. That resolves the slow, steady, barely there fear of something going wrong, of the body declining, of time running short, of doing the right things and still losing ground. That particular frequency of internal experience maintains the exact biological environment in which the compressed eating window cannot do its job cleanly. Two people, identical protocols, one body quiet and trusting, one body braced. The braced body is not broken. It is doing exactly what a braced body should do, conserving, defending, diverting resources away from repair and toward readiness. Autophagic activity, the cellular recycling process that activates during the fasted state, is similarly attenuated in the presence of chronic inflammatory load. The cellular cleanup crew shows up, but works slower, clears less, leaves more debris behind. The floor gets swept, but never quite comes clean. The absence of food was not enough. The absence of threat was the other ingredient. This is what no supplement label will ever print. Not because the science is uncertain, but because there is no margin in it. The industry that sells fasting support products runs on the same premise as the pharmaceutical one, that the deficiency is chemical and the solution is external. Ship it to your door. Take it on day one of your fasting window. The stack will do what you cannot do alone. What the data suggests is that the stack is solving for the wrong variable. The cellular environment that allows fasting to function as repair rather than stress is determined upstream of any supplement. In the signaling state, the nervous system is running when the fast begins. The body interprets the same physiological event through the lens of its current internal context. Fasting entered from exhaustion reads differently than fasting entered from composure. The L cells respond differently. The autophagic threshold shifts. The satiety architecture of the gut is capable of building without a single injection, either assembles cleanly or assembles under interference. The state the body is in when it begins the fast is not a footnote. It is the operating environment inside, which every cellular instruction either executes or degrades. Two biochemically similar bodies running the same protocol produce different results, not because one is trying harder, but because one is carrying a different internal signal into the process. What you bring into the fast shapes what the fast can do. The research keeps arriving at this from different directions, through different measures, and landing in the same place. That is not a footnote. That is the finding. And it changes what the next question has to be. Because if the biology of the fasted pause is this elegantly engineered, this available, this precisely responsive to internal state, then the work is not only about the protocol. The work is about what you carry in, which means there's a set of tools the fasting research cannot hand you, but that sit directly adjacent to everything it has shown. Not instead of the window, the timing, the rhythm. Alongside it, upstream of it, the part that determines whether the rest of it holds. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up on any blood panel. It isn't the tiredness that comes from not sleeping enough, or from working too hard, or from skipping a workout 3 weeks in a row. It's quieter than all of that. It's the exhaustion of having tried, genuinely tried for decades, and still not being sure whether you're doing it right. You know this because you've been there. The low-calorie phase in your 30s that worked until it didn't. The meal plan from a magazine that made you feel virtuous for 11 days before you caved at a dinner party and spent the drive home negotiating with yourself. The period when you cut carbs completely and felt sharp for a while, then hollow, then vaguely angry in a way you couldn't quite explain to anyone. The cleanse, the point system, the app that graded your dinner, the nutritionist who contradicted the last nutritionist, the morning you stood at the refrigerator door in the dark, the cool air drifting against your bare feet on the tile, trying to remember which version of yourself you were supposed to be feeding today. That accumulated weight, not the physical kind, but the cognitive and emotional kind, is real, and it doesn't get acknowledged enough. The culture that produced all those promises also produced a very specific type of internal damage. A person who is genuinely confused about something as old and instinctive as eating, conditioned to view their own hunger as a problem to be managed rather than a signal to be heard. Someone who has spent so much mental energy on food rules that sitting down for a meal carries the faint, dull residue of guilt before the fork even touches the plate. That's where this chapter begins. Not with another protocol, not with a new study telling you that everything you did before was wrong, but with an acknowledgement that if you feel a certain wariness right now, a protective skepticism, a slight tightening in the chest when someone starts talking about what you should or shouldn't eat, that response is not a character flaw. It's a reasonable adaptation. It's what happens when you've been told repeatedly by sources that presented themselves as authoritative that the answer is just around the corner. If you're willing to be strict enough, disciplined enough, willing enough to override your own body's signals in favor of the approved plan. The diet industry didn't just sell you products. It sold you a frame, a way of understanding your body as something that needs to be corrected from the outside, controlled from the top down, disciplined into compliance. And when the product didn't work, or stopped working, or worked but made you miserable, the frame ensured that the blame landed somewhere familiar on you. Your willpower, your consistency, your commitment to the process. The industry stayed clean. You stayed inadequate. Now here is what's actually happening in research and why it matters for you specifically. In the last several years, a cluster of studies, significant enough that they've started crossing from academic journals into clinical practice discussions, has been documenting what happens inside human cells during periods when the body isn't processing food. Not starvation, not the punishing deprivation of a crash diet, just the ordinary metabolic breathing room that opens up when the digestive system goes quiet long enough to shift the body's priorities. The researchers at the Salk Institute and the Buck Institute for Research on Aging have been mapping this with increasing precision, and what they're finding is not subtle. During that window, the body begins a kind of internal audit. Damaged proteins, worn-out cellular components, the accumulated debris of a body moving through time, flagged, broken down, recycled. The biology of this process is well established, and it appears to be not a feature of exceptional genetics or unusual discipline, but a baseline human capacity available to anyone, waiting for the right conditions to activate. What the studies couldn't initially explain was the variance. Stand in the kitchen again for a moment, bare feet on the tile, the hum of the refrigerator in the dark. And consider this: two people can enter the same practice, same duration, same structure, and come out with measurably different cellular results. The protocol identical, the biology not. That gap is what more recent research in stress physiology has started to close. A person who enters a fasting period from fear, fear of aging, fear of the mirror, fear of a body they've stopped trusting, arrives at that threshold carrying a specific biochemical signature. Elevated cortisol, a nervous system tuned to threat, an internal environment that reads the absence of food not as an invitation to repair, but as another emergency in a long sequence of emergencies. Work tracking inflammatory cytokines and autonomic nervous system activity during caloric restriction now shows this clearly. The psychological state of the person practicing shapes the physiological response. Fear and trust produce different chemistry. Restriction from self-punishment and restriction from self-care activate different cascades at the cellular level. You can feel the difference in your chest. It turns out your cells can measure it too. This is what the diet industry never had an incentive to tell you. Because a body you've learned to trust doesn't need a correction kit. It needs conditions. And conditions, unlike products, don't generate recurring revenue. The exhaustion of a life spent moving from one promise to the next isn't only emotional weight. It etches itself into how the body receives new information, a physiological bracing for disappointment, a baseline of cellular defensiveness that can intercept even genuinely useful practices and blunt their effect. The cold tile under your feet, the refrigerator hum, the low-grade dread of choosing wrong again. That experience has a downstream biology. The research is saying so now, plainly, in peer-reviewed language, which means the first repair isn't metabolic. It's relational. The slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding trust with a body that has been treated for a long time as the problem rather than the ally. No elimination protocol can begin that. No point system can initiate it. But here is what can, and what the evidence now supports. When the internal state shifts, when the body stops receiving even beneficial practices as another form of punishment, the cellular environment changes in ways that are not metaphorical and not minor. The same fasting window that produces a stress response in a frightened body produces measurable autophagy, upregulation in a body that has been brought, however partially, back into a relationship of trust with itself. You are not starting over. You are starting from somewhere more honest than you've been allowed to start before. And the research is for once on your side. There's a moment somewhere around the 14th hour when the body stops arguing. Not dramatically. It does not announce itself. 1 minute, there is the low background hum of hunger. Not painful, just persistent, like a notification that keeps lighting up a screen. And then, quietly, it is not there anymore. The body has moved into something else. Something that feels, from the inside, less like deprivation and more like a room that has finally been tidied. That shift is not willpower. It is not discipline holding the line. It is a biological event. And what is happening inside the gut wall at that moment is precise enough to be measured, replicated, and published, though it has not made it far outside the research circles where it first appeared. Here is what is actually occurring. The small intestine, after a full day of processing, a day that probably started before 8 in the morning and ran through dinner and a handful of things grabbed from the kitchen afterward, does not simply go quiet when food stops arriving. It changes modes. The short, rhythmic contractions that move food forward give way to something longer and slower, a wave that travels the entire length of the intestine rather than working one small section at a time. Gastroenterologists call this the migrating motor complex. It runs on roughly a 90-minute cycle when the gut is empty, and what it does is closer to housekeeping than rest, clearing residue, moving cellular debris, restoring the chemical environment inside the lining to something closer to baseline. Inside that restored environment, a population of cells that nutrition conversation almost entirely ignores becomes active in a way it cannot when digestion is constant. These are the enteroendocrine cells, hormone-secreting cells distributed across the gut wall like sensors embedded in a field. There are more than 20 identified types. The one that matters most here is the L cell, which synthesizes and releases the hormones that signal genuine satiety to the brain through the vagus nerve, not the temporary fullness of physical volume. The chemical signal of completion, the one that actually lands in the brain as enough. Research from groups at the University of Gothenburg and the Nestle Institute of Health Sciences in Lausanne, published in the journal Gut, showed something that should have reframed the entire conversation about eating windows. L cells become measurably more responsive when the intestinal environment has had adequate time without processing new material. Receptor expression upregulates. Hormonal output from a single meal, eaten after an extended pause, differs significantly from the same meal eaten inside a constant feeding pattern. The gut is not just rested, it is recalibrated. It is better, in documented biochemical terms, at the job it was built to do. And the clarity that arrives alongside this, that slightly more precise quality of thought that starts somewhere around hour 15, is not a story the mind is telling itself. It is chemistry. The postprandial inflammatory load that follows every meal, particularly meals high in refined carbohydrates and seed oils, involve a low-level immune activation and cytokine release that temporarily blunts neural clarity. When that load is absent, the body shifts fuel sources. Glycogen stores run lower. Fatty acid mobilization begins. Beta-hydroxybutyrate, a ketone, crosses the blood-brain barrier and exerts direct anti-inflammatory effects on the brain's immune cells, an effect documented in work from the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. The mind that feels cleaner during a fast is not performing discipline. It is running on a different substrate in a body no longer splitting its resources in 14 directions. This is where the science settles into something genuinely useful. But there's a finding that neither the intermittent fasting advocates nor the caloric restriction camp has built into their frameworks. And it is the one that explains why the same protocol, followed identically by two different people, can produce results that are not even close to identical. The migrating motor complex, the L cell recalibration, the mucosal repair work that researchers at the Charité Universitätsmedizin in Berlin have been documenting. None of it runs on a fixed clock. It does not activate at hour 12 because a tracking app says so. It is modulated continuously by the state of the nervous system. The enteric nervous system, roughly 500 million neurons embedded in the intestinal wall, in constant bidirectional conversation with the brain, shifts into its restorative mode only when the central nervous system allows it. When the body is running in a high alert pattern, elevated sympathetic tone, the chronically reduced heart rate variability that autonomic researchers at the University of Amsterdam have been profiling for years, the enteric system does not fully transition. The migrating motor complex shortens or is suppressed. L cells remain relatively unresponsive. The gut is doing something that looks like fasting from the outside and shows up identically on a tracking app, but is biochemically a different event entirely. Which means two people can be doing the exact same thing, same hours, same eating window, same restriction, and what is happening inside each of them is not the same. One of them is fasting from fear. The number on the scale, the blood panel result, the feeling of being out of control in a body they do not fully trust. The pause is a punishment or a correction or a negotiation with something they are afraid of. The nervous system is running high. The gut is not fully receiving the signal to restore. The other has, through repetition and attention and a slowly accumulated experience of what the pause actually feels like, come to know that the body does not punish the quiet. The stillness that arrives around hour 14 is not something to push through. It is the thing itself. The body doing exactly what it was designed to do when given space to do it. The nervous system is not braced. The gut shifts modes the way it is supposed to. Same protocol, same biology on paper, measurably different chemistry inside. The fields that are beginning to document this gap precisely, neuroendocrinology, psychoneuroimmunology, are producing data specific enough that the nutrition world is going to have to reckon with it. Because what the data points toward is not a more complicated version of restriction. It is something more interesting than that. The possibility that the physical results of a practice are not separable from the internal state in which the practice is being done. That the gut's intelligence is real, is measurable, and is available, but only to the nervous system willing to receive it. That is not a philosophical position. It is increasingly a finding. He woke up at 5:47 every morning, and the first thing he felt was his stomach. Not hunger exactly, more like surveillance. A low, tight monitoring of the silence where breakfast used to be. He'd lie there with the radiator ticking in the corner. That small, impatient sound he'd stopped noticing years ago, but which had started registering again around the same time he started the fast. And he'd run a kind of internal diagnostic, checking, looking for signs that something was going wrong. He'd downloaded an app that tracked his fasting window down to the second, and he opened it the way you check a wound, not expecting good news, but needing to see. He'd read the threads, the cortisol spikes, the muscle loss, the thyroid studies. He'd bookmarked 19 things he was going to look into when he had time. He was doing it right. He was absolutely sure he was doing it wrong. 15 miles across the city, a man roughly his same age was also skipping breakfast. He made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the street come awake. The delivery trucks, the dog walkers, the gradual, ordinary return of morning. The hunger was there. He didn't fight it or narrate it. It was just the held breath before something opens. Same protocol, same 16:8 window. Started the same month, reading what was probably the same article, shared by the same kind of algorithm, watching the same search history. 2 years later, their blood work looked like they'd been running completely different experiments. The man who watched the street had better insulin sensitivity, lower CRP, C-reactive protein, the inflammation marker that shows up in serious longitudinal fasting research before almost anything else. Higher BDNF, the protein tied to neuroplasticity and cognitive resilience. His mitochondrial efficiency, measured through VO2 testing rather than anything on a standard clinic panel, had improved in ways his doctor found mildly puzzling. He hadn't taken anything exotic. He just kept showing up morning after morning without treating the hunger like an emergency. The other man's markers had plateaued. Some had quietly worsened. His doctor suggested he might not be a good candidate for intermittent fasting. He stopped. He tried a different protocol, then a different one. The fast had failed him, or that was the story. But something else is what actually happened, and it changes the entire frame. A 2021 study in Cell Reports Medicine. Researchers at UCSF's Metabolic Unit, not a wellness blog, not a longevity influencer recycling the same Nobel Prize citation, tracked not just metabolic markers in fasting participants, but the psychobiological state they brought into the fast. Salivary alpha amylase, a proxy for sympathetic nervous system activation that most studies quietly ignore, was measured alongside the usual panels. What they found had been underreported almost everywhere. The stress response during caloric restriction is not passive. It's active, it's measurable, and it directly modulates the pathways that make fasting biologically interesting in the first place. AMPK, one of the master switches of cellular repair, the thing that tells the body to shift resources from growth toward cleanup, doesn't operate in isolation. It's sensitive to the hormonal environment surrounding it. Participants in higher sympathetic activation states showed suppressed AMPK signaling, lower markers of mitochondrial biogenesis, and the part that stays with you, higher fasting glucose. Not because they broke the protocol, not because they ate something they shouldn't have, because the biochemistry of threat state fasting partially mimics the biochemistry of mild starvation stress, and the body responds accordingly. It doesn't read the absence of food as permission to repair. It reads it as evidence that something is wrong. The body under threat does not clean house. It locks the doors. There's a version of this that gets explained as vibration, as resonance, as the body being a frequency-based system. And those aren't wrong exactly, but they can drift in a language that lets you sidestep what's actually happening at the cellular level. So stay with the cellular level for a moment. What AMPK is listening to is not just the presence or absence of food. It's the total internal environment. The nervous system's read on whether this situation is safe. The radiator ticking. The app counting down. The 19 bookmark studies about everything that might be going wrong. That's a signal. The body receives it before you finish thinking it. The hormonal response to fasting in a threat state is different in specific and measurable ways from the hormonal response to fasting in a state of basic ease, and that difference shows up in blood work 2 years later. This is not about achieving some meditative purity before you're allowed to skip breakfast. It's much simpler and considerably less photogenic than that. It's about whether the hunger, when it arrives, registers as a wound or as weather. One of those readings activates repair. The other activates management of a perceived emergency. The body doesn't care which interpretation feels more rational to you. It responds to whichever one is running. The man with the ticking radiator wasn't doing anything wrong. That's the part that matters. He was consistent. He was disciplined. He'd read more about the science than most people who would ever try this. And the protocol still didn't do what it was supposed to do because underneath the protocol, at a level no app was measuring, he was fasting from fear. Fear of a number on the scale. Fear of cognitive decline. Fear of arriving at 60 in a body that had stopped cooperating. All legitimate. All completely understandable for a man in his mid-50s who's watching his father's memory and his brother's heart and the general drift of time. But fear runs its own chemistry, and that chemistry doesn't yield to a correctly timed eating window. What the second man had wasn't discipline or special knowledge or a better supplement stack. It was something closer to a working agreement with his own body. Not certainty, not wellness brand serenity, just a functional trust that the hunger was part of the process rather than evidence that the process was failing him. That's not a personality trait you either have or you don't. It's a relationship that can shift. It shifted for a number of the UCSF participants mid-study, and when it did, the markers moved. The practical implication of all this is not another thing to track. It's almost the opposite. Before the window opens tomorrow morning, before the coffee, before you check the timer, there's a moment available. Not long, 30 seconds, maybe. Just a simple internal question about what you're carrying into the fast. Whether the hunger, when it comes, is going to be evidence or just sensation. Whether the body you're in right now is an adversary running behind on its metrics or something that's been trying to repair itself for 50-odd years and would do it quite well if given the right conditions. The right conditions are not primarily about the clock. The man watching the street understood that without ever reading a paper about AMPK. He just stood there with a coffee and let the morning be ordinary, and his cells, receiving that signal, quietly got to work. That's available. It was always free. It doesn't require anything to be purchased or downloaded or calibrated. It just requires a different question at the start of the day. There's a product on the shelf right now, probably in your local grocery store, probably near the protein powders. That costs $42 for a 30-day supply. The label says intermittent fasting support. It has a graphic of a clock on it, clean and authoritative, the kind of design that implies precision. Pick up the bottle. Feel the weight of it, the faint rattle of capsules inside. The sealed plastic that smells of something vaguely clinical and vaguely sweet. The clock graphic is there to remind you that fasting is complicated enough to require a supplement. That is what the industry decided, and that decision is worth looking at directly. This is the promise made several chapters ago, that we would examine what happened to the most ancient, most freely available biological tool the human body possesses. Here is the answer. They packaged silence. They put a barcode on the pause between meals and sold it back to you with a recommended dosage. It started quietly, the way most profitable ideas do. The research on cellular autophagy, the body's internal maintenance process, the mechanism by which damaged proteins and debris get cleared and recycled, began publishing in earnest through the early 2000s, gaining enough scientific weight that in 2016 the Nobel Committee awarded its prize in physiology or medicine to Yoshinori Ohsumi specifically for his work mapping how cells eat themselves clean. That was a Wednesday in October. By the following year, the wellness industry had already begun converting the finding into revenue. Not fraudulently, not with outright lies, just with the old, reliable machinery of complexity. Take something the body already does on its own schedule, make it sound technical, add a measuring device and a subscription tier, and wait. The air inside a supplement store has a particular quality to it. Cool and faintly powdery, the smell of sealed plastic and something vaguely vanilla. And it is a smell that now accompanies words like fasting protocol autophagy activator, and metabolic window optimization. You could buy a continuous glucose monitor to track your fast. You could buy an app with algorithms to tell you when your fast counts. You could buy exogenous ketone drinks to accelerate the state your body would enter on its own if you simply stopped eating for a while and rested in that. The industry has not denied that fasting works. It has done something smarter. It has made fasting feel insufficient without its products. What the research actually says is less complicated and more interesting. A 2022 study out of the University of Illinois Chicago tracked participants through time-restricted eating windows and found measurable improvements in blood pressure, oxidative stress markers, and insulin sensitivity. With no caloric restriction required, no supplement stack, no monitoring beyond a basic eating window. The participants who improved most were not the ones with the most disciplined protocols. They were the ones who reported the least anxiety about the process. That detail appeared in the data and received almost no coverage. It did not fit on a label. There is a researcher at the Salk Institute, Satchidananda Panda, whose work on circadian rhythm and time-restricted feeding has been building for over a decade. His findings are consistent and somewhat uncomfortable for the market. The body has internal timing mechanisms, clock genes active in almost every tissue, that regulate metabolism according to light, temperature, and the timing of food. When food arrives in alignment with those rhythms, repair processes activate more efficiently. When it arrives in misalignment, late nights, erratic windows, the system degrades regardless of what you eat or which supplements you take. The circadian clock does not respond to your credit card. That is simply not one of its inputs. And yet the industry's response to this research has been predictable. Within 18 months of Panda's work gaining mainstream attention, there were fasting mimicking meal kits on the market. There were apps with circadian fasting trackers. There was, somewhere in a conference room in California, a whiteboard with the words, "Monetize the window" written on it. The body's ability to self-repair, autophagy, mitochondrial renewal, the clearing of senescent cells that accumulate with age, is not activated by any product currently on the market. The research does not support that claim, and the companies selling autophagy support supplements know it. What activates it is the absence of something, the absence of constant caloric input, the absence of the hormonal signaling that tells the body resources are abundant and growth is the priority. You cannot bottle the absence of something. You cannot sell it on a subscription. That is the problem from their perspective. From your perspective, it lands differently because the industry has been loud and the body has been quiet, and over time, the loud thing shapes what people believe is real. The person who buys the $42 bottle is responding rationally to an information environment that has been deliberately constructed to make free things feel incomplete. He has read about autophagy on 3 different websites, all of which mention a product in the 5th paragraph. He has watched videos where fasting was presented as a precise, technical intervention requiring careful management. He is doing what the environment trained him to do, reaching for the tool he was told he needed. The environment was engineered. The response was logical. The truth sitting beneath all of this is quieter. The body has been performing cellular repair during sleep and between meals since long before anyone named it, since long before there was a market for naming it. The mechanism does not require your intervention. It requires your permission. And there is a meaningful difference between those two things that the industry has worked very hard to obscure. because permission costs nothing and intervention can be sold, which is where the laws of vibration and attraction become relevant in a way that does not appear in any supplement label. Because the body entering repair is not only a metabolic event, it is a state, and states are governed by something prior to protocol. The research on stress physiology is clear that chronic sympathetic activation, the body reading its environment as threatening, suppresses the same repair pathways that fasting is meant to open. Autophagy and alarm do not run simultaneously. The body in defense does not invest in renovation. What you believe about your safety, your sufficiency, your capacity to restore, that belief is not separate from the biology. It is upstream of it. Attraction, in its most grounded reading, is the principle that the dominant signal you emit shapes what the system moves toward. A body vibrating at the frequency of scarcity, of effort, of constant monitoring, will use the empty stomach as evidence of threat. A body that has absorbed the knowledge that it already carries everything it needs will use the same empty stomach as a cue to begin cleaning house. That is not mysticism. It is the mechanism. And it is the reason the quietest fasts, the ones undertaken with ease rather than discipline, with trust rather than tracking, tend to produce the outcomes the tracked ones are chasing. You already have the instrument. You already know how to use it. The only thing that was ever in question was whether you believed that was enough. Somewhere around hour 14, the kitchen goes dark and quiet in a specific way. The coffee someone made before dinner is still on the counter, cold now, the smell gone faint and papery. The house has settled into that particular stillness that only arrives after 11. And something shifts inside you. Not dramatically. There is no announcement. The low-grade mental static that was running at noon, at dinner, at 9 when you're scrolling through things that did not matter. It is simply absent. A cool, clean quality of attention settles in, the way a room changes when the air conditioning finally cycles off and you realize the hum was always there. That moment is not your imagination. And we needed everything said before this point to say what it actually is. Because the shift you feel at hour 14 is not just the absence of food. It is a different hormonal conversation happening inside you. And who is leading that conversation and what they are saying depends almost entirely on the internal state you walked into the fast with. That is the thing the fasting industry cannot sell you, and the aging fear industry needs you never to discover. Here's what the research shows. A 2021 paper out of the Max Planck Institute of Biology of Aging in Cologne, published in Nature Cell Biology, documented with unusual precision the way cellular cleanup accelerates during nutrient absence. The mechanism is autophagy, the process by which cells begin dismantling and recycling their own damaged components. Yoshinori Osumi established that autophagy happens during fasting. His Nobel came in 2016. What the Max Planck paper added, quietly, was something different. What modulated the intensity and quality of that response was the hormonal environment present at the moment the fast began. When that environment signaled threat, elevated norepinephrine, suppressed oxytocin, a cortisol curve that had been climbing since afternoon. The autophagic response was present but truncated. The cells did the work, but cautiously, as if under guard, rationing their effort the way you ration wood when you're not sure how long the winter runs. when the environment signaled something closer to safety. Blood sugar coming down steadily from a calm meal, lower inflammatory cytokines, the parasympathetic nervous system in relative dominance. The cleanup ran longer, deeper, cleared more cellular debris per unit of time. Same hours, same empty plate, fundamentally different cellular outcome. This is the place where the industry built around fasting tools cannot follow you. The apps can log your window. The electrolyte powders can buffer the mineral dip. The coaching programs can hold you accountable to the clock. None of them can reach into the hormonal environment you brought to the window. None of them are selling what actually determines the quality of what happens inside those hours. And the industry that sells fear of aging, softly, persistently, in the grammar of deficiency and decline, has a structural interest in you never quite trusting that your body knows what to do when given space. A body you trust does not need much. A body you are afraid of is a reliable customer. The studies most likely to receive commercial backing are those that end in a product. Fasting ends in nothing purchasable. An empty plate, a quiet hour, a kitchen dark at midnight. There is no margin in that for anyone except the man sitting in it. So here is what changes when you actually hold this. Two men, same age, same general health baseline, same 16-hour window. Picture them at hour 10, the house still, something cold on the counter. The first man is fasting because he is afraid not to. There's a quiet dread underneath his discipline. The biological unease of watching the years accelerate. The creeping suspicion that the body is already losing something he cannot name. When hunger moves through him at hour 10, it feels like confirmation, like the body reporting damage. He is cold in a way that has nothing to do with temperature. The fast feels like a correction he is owed, not a process he trusts. The second man sits in a different register. Not certainty. Certainty here would be naive, and that is not what this is. Something older and quieter than certainty. A working familiarity with what his body does when given space. He has been in this window before. He has come out the other side with that clean quality of mind that nothing else produces in quite the same way. When hunger moves through him, it feels like a process underway, like the sound a house makes when it is settling, not cracking. The hormonal signals those two men are sending to their cells across those same 16 hours are measurably different. The first man's stress axis stays active. Inflammatory markers trend upward. His cells receive a continuous message that resources are scarce and the situation is unresolved. And in that context, autophagy competes with survival signaling. The cleanup crew gets called off the floor because the alarm is ringing and no one has silenced it. The second man's inflammatory profile stays quieter. The fasting-induced rise in norepinephrine, which is real, which is part of the mechanism behind the mental clarity, the cool sharpness that arrives unrequested at hour 14, happens without cortisol layered on top of it like static over signal. The cells receive something different. Space, not siege. An instruction to repair, not to hold position. The internal state is not a mood floating above the body. It is a continuous broadcast the body reads in chemistry. This is what the University of California, San Francisco documented in psychoneuroimmunology in 2022, tracking interoceptive awareness, the capacity to accurately sense what is happening inside, against inflammatory markers in adults practicing time-restricted eating. Higher interoceptive trust correlated with lower IL-6 and TNF-alpha at the cellular level. The body you trust produces different conditions than the body you monitor for failure. That cool clarity at hour 14, that almost luminous cleanliness of attention, the feeling like a room after rain when the windows have been closed all week, is not simply produced by the hours themselves. The hours create the possibility. What you bring to them determines how much of that possibility the cells can use. Which opens a question worth sitting with before sleep tonight, in whatever quiet the hour allows. If the internal state during the fast shapes the cellular outcome, if the quality of what you carry into the absence determines what the absence activates, then what exactly is passing between the mind and the mitochondria? Not as metaphor, not as mood, as mechanism. How does something operating at the scale of perception make contact with something operating at the scale of a cell, choosing whether to repair or wait? That is not a question this series invented. It is the question the research keeps arriving at and then declining to answer. The next conversation is where we go there. There's a moment, sometime around hour 14, when the hunger stops. Not fades, stops. Like a signal that was broadcasting on a frequency the body finally learned to ignore. The stomach goes quiet. The air in the room feels different, thinner somehow, more precise. And if you've ever been there, genuinely there, not just skipped breakfast by accident, you know that what arrives in that silence isn't weakness. It's something closer to clarity, a kind of stillness that feels almost architectural, like the body has rearranged furniture in a room you forgot you owned. That's the payoff on a question we left open earlier. How does the law of vibration actually connect to biology? Not as metaphor, not as wellness vocabulary, as mechanism. Because what happens in that hour 14 stillness is not random. It's a cellular event shaped in measurable part by the internal environment you brought into the fast, by the frequency the body was already running on before the food stopped. Here's what the research is starting to confirm, and it's more specific than the usual autophagy headlines. Several independent lines of inquiry into the cellular stress response have begun tracking something that gets buried in the method sections of fasting studies. Not just what the body does during caloric restriction, but what state the body was in before the restriction began. The specific markers vary. Interleukin-6, NLRP3 inflammasome activity, salivary alpha amylase as a proxy for sympathetic nervous system activation. But the pattern that keeps emerging is consistent enough to take seriously. Participants who enter a fasting window in a state of elevated baseline anxiety show measurably blunted autophagic response. The body, under those conditions, is not repairing. It's bracing. Same protocol, different bodies, different internal weather. The language researchers use is careful, as researchers tend to be. They don't say fear breaks fasting. They say baseline sympathetic tone modulates the cellular response to caloric restriction. But read that slowly once. The body was listening, not to the absence of food, to the state of the person who stopped eating. This is cell biology. The autonomic nervous system doesn't pause when you skip dinner. It keeps broadcasting. And the cells, particularly the mitochondria, particularly the immune tissue, particularly the gut epithelium, are receiving that broadcast in real time. When the broadcast is running on threat, the body allocates resources toward defense. Repair gets rationed. The cellular housekeeping we call autophagy, the process where the body breaks down damaged proteins and dysfunctional organelles to rebuild cleaner structures, requires a parasympathetic baseline to fully engage. It requires, in biological terms, a body that believes it is safe. There's a smell that comes with this. If you fasted long enough, you may know it. A faint metallic note in your own breath, almost sweet underneath, like turned earth after rain. That's ketone production. That's the body running on its own reserves efficiently the way it was designed to. But that process, smooth, generative, internally regulated, only runs at full capacity when the nervous system isn't simultaneously flooding the bloodstream with glucose mobilization signals triggered by stress hormones. You cannot have both at once. The body doesn't multitask threat and repair. It chooses, and the choice isn't made by willpower. This is where the framing that's been sold to us for 20 years starts to come apart. The diet industry, and by extension the fasting industry that grew up alongside it, built its entire model on the premise that the intervention is the variable. The number of hours, the eating window, the macros, the caloric deficit. Buy the app, follow the protocol, execute the restriction correctly. The body will comply. But compliance isn't the point. The body isn't a system waiting for correct inputs. It's a system reading the entire context of the person who is giving those inputs. And the context includes emotional state, the background noise of the inner narrative, the reason behind the choice to stop eating. Two people, same 16-hour fast. One is fasting from a place of deep distrust of their own body, running a background story that says the body is failing, aging too fast, accumulating damage it can't repair, and the only solution is to intervene aggressively and hope something works before time runs out. The other is fasting from a quieter position, a belief, not naive, but grounded, that the body is capable, that the restriction is simply removing interference from a system that already knows how to work. The first person's nervous system is running defense protocols before they finish their last meal. The second person's cells are already beginning to shift toward regenerative activity. The frequency the body broadcasts, measured in cytokine ratios, in vagal tone, in inflammatory markers, in the ratio of cortisol to DHEA, determines which cellular programs get activated during the window of restriction. The vibration is the variable. The protocol is just the container. What the emerging research on fasting and psychological state keeps finding is this: the degree of benefit correlates more strongly with the internal posture someone carries into the restriction than with their adherence to the dietary protocol itself. Psychological flexibility, the capacity to move through discomfort without catastrophizing it, to experience hunger as information rather than emergency, tracks more closely with regenerative outcomes than hour counts do. Participants who arrive rigid, braced, fighting, trying to force the body into compliance through discipline show attenuated benefit even when their dietary adherence is perfect. The ones who arrive with something closer to trust show the strongest response. The intervention was identical. The internal environment was not. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from fasting in fear. You probably felt it, if not from fasting, then from any sustained effort made from a place of self-doubt. It's different from physical fatigue. It has a weight to it that sits just behind the sternum, a low, dull pressure, like wearing something slightly too heavy for conditions that don't justify a coat. That isn't poetic description. That's the body burning energy on two projects at once. The restriction itself, and the chronic low-level threat response that keeps every cell on partial standby, waiting for an emergency that may or may not come. The market around fasting was not designed to surface this. Not because the science doesn't exist, it's in peer-reviewed work, it's reproducible, it's accumulated, but because you cannot sell someone's internal state. You can sell an app. You can sell a supplement to ease the transition. You can sell a course that tells you exactly when to eat and when to stop. But the frequency you carry into the fast requires no purchase. And so it reliably gets left out of the conversation, and people fast correctly, technically repeatedly, and wonder why the results feel blunted, why the clarity they were promised arrives inconsistently, why the body seems resistant to its own repair. The body is not resistant. It's responsive, more responsive than we've been told. Responsive to the state you arrive in, not just the protocol you execute once you're there. What activates the repair is not the absence of food. It's the state in which you enter that absence. That stillness which arrives around hour 14, the one that feels almost architectural, is not guaranteed by the clock. It opens for a body that approaches the fast as an act of trust. It stays narrow or closes entirely for a body approaching it as an act of war. The difference between those two is not discipline. It's not information. It's the quality of the relationship between the person and the body they are asking to heal. One more thing before this chapter closes, and it's worth sitting with before the next one. We've been talking about the difference between fasting from fear and fasting from confidence. But there's a version of this that goes deeper than fear of aging or fear of decline. Something older, more corrosive, and far more common than most people admit to. What happens inside the body, not just the nervous system, but the cellular architecture, the hormonal signaling, the actual tissue, when someone enters a period of restriction, not from anxiety about the future, but from a settled, chronic contempt for the body they're living in right now. That question pulls at something the research has begun to reach toward. It's uncomfortable in a specific way, and it's where this is going next. Around hour 14 of a fast, not dramatic, not clinical, just the quiet kind, where you skipped dinner and woke up and kept going, the refrigerator hum you didn't know you were hearing stops. The kitchen smells like nothing. The hunger is still present, a low wire pulled taut somewhere below the sternum, faintly metallic, almost like the air before rain. But underneath it, something else, a stillness that feels almost cool, like opening a door inside a house and finding a room no one has been in with better light. That moment was described in the last chapter. The question behind it was this: if two people enter the exact same window of not eating, same hours, same biology on paper, why does one emerge lighter, sharper, more alive, while the other comes out more depleted than before? Here is what the research is starting to name. When fear is the engine driving the fast, not discipline or curiosity, but the low, grinding dread of the mirror, the panic that lives underneath a bathroom scale, the voice that says you are running out of time. The organism does not register a longevity signal. It registers a threat, and it responds accordingly. This is not philosophical. It is operational. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis does not take instructions from intentions. It reads context. It reads the biochemical environment surrounding a behavior, not the behavior itself. When a person enters caloric restriction from a state of sustained self-hostility, the specific cocktail of self-disgust and urgency that the wellness industry quietly sells back as motivation, the brain receives a very old, very primitive signal: scarcity under attack. That signal activates a cascade that has nothing to do with repair. Work published through UCSF's Osher Center and Maastricht University's Metabolism Unit has pointed towards something that should stop people mid-sentence when they discuss fasting protocols. The subjective state of the faster measurably alters metabolic outcomes. Not marginally, significantly. The same 12-hour overnight fast in a person carrying high-threat vigilance suppresses adiponectin, the hormone that signals fat tissue to release stored energy and keeps ghrelin dysregulated in ways that block, rather than trigger, cellular cleanup. Put plainly, the body under threat does not burn. It holds, because holding is what bodies have always done under threat. Holding is surviving. Releasing requires safety. Autophagy, the cellular recycling process this entire series has been building toward, does not initiate out of desperation. Imaging work completed in late 2023 through Karolinska's partner institution in Gothenburg found that autophagic flux, the actual rate at which cells dismantle damaged components and recycle them, is measurably blunted in subjects with elevated threat state biomarkers, even when caloric conditions would otherwise favor it. The calories were absent. The mechanism refused to engage. The body was fasting. The body was not renewing. Think about what that means concretely, not abstractly. There are people right now, possibly people you know, possibly you at some point in your life, cutting meals and skipping food and white-knuckling through hunger, driven entirely by fear of what they see in the mirror. And biologically, they're not activating repair. They are activating conservation. They're not sending the signal that says we are safe, clean house. They're sending the signal that says we are under siege, lock everything down. That experience has a specific texture. The jaw set, the breath high in the chest, never quite reaching the bottom of the lungs, the rib cage a little rigid, the shoulders held an inch too close to the ears. The hunger received not as information, but as punishment for being the wrong shape, for having taken too long to figure this out, for being 52 and still fighting the same body. That texture is not neutral data. It is input, and every emotional state has a corresponding neurochemical signature. Fear-driven restriction sends a specific one. Elevated inflammatory cytokines, suppressed IGF, one in ways that block tissue maintenance rather than promote it, a hormonal profile that instructs fat cells to protect their stores because winter is hostile and long. The body cannot distinguish between famine during wartime and a diet motivated by self-loathing. The signal pattern is too similar. The same stimulus, the same ancient response can serve, contract, hold. The same hours of fasting, the same absence of food, a completely different molecular conversation. There is an industry that benefits from this confusion, and it is worth saying plainly, without theater. If the effectiveness of any protocol depends on the internal state of the person executing it, then protocols alone cannot be sold as solutions. The structured fasting app, the 21-day reset, the supplement stack, None of them have a financial incentive to disclose that the emotional relationship a person carries into the protocol is the variable that determines whether it works. That information sits in the peer-reviewed literature. It does not appear on the label. A 2022 study from the Charite Research Hospital in Berlin tracked adults over 50 through a modified fasting protocol and found that self-reported body acceptance at baseline was a stronger predictor of favorable metabolic outcomes: LDL reduction, waist circumference change, inflammatory marker shifts, than adherence rate. People who entered with less internal conflict got more from the same protocol. People who hated their way through it got less, sometimes nothing, and in some cases saw inflammatory markers rise despite eating less. Less food, more inflammation. The body is not punishing anyone. The body is responding. It always is. Every physiological signal is a question, and the emotional state is part of what answers it. Not in the language of intention or belief, but in the language of cortisol, cytokines, and suppressed adiponectin. The mechanism does not care what you meant to do. It reads what the organism is actually experiencing, the way a thermostat reads air temperature and not ambition. What this means for GLP-1, the natural peptide this series began with, the pharmaceutical industry has spent billions learning to approximate, is something the next section will have to address directly. GLP-1 does not operate in isolation. It operates within a hormonal environment. And if that environment is dominated by threat state chemistry, the peptide's own signaling capacity is blunted at the receptor level before any fasting window, any meal timing, any intervention of any kind gets a chance to matter. The gate is real. The key is not what the protocol prescribes. And the next chapter names specifically what the biology actually requires to open it. There's a version of this that almost no one talks about. Not the version where you white-knuckle through the hunger, watching the clock, measuring the hours the way a man measures what he's owed. Not the one where the discipline feels like punishment dressed in the vocabulary of health. That version exists, and it produces results that look right on paper. But there's another version, quieter, steadier, and the body treats them as if they were two completely different events. Earlier, we left the question open. What does it mean to enter the fast from a place of respect, of security, of genuine trust in the body's own intelligence? Not as a concept, as something physiologically distinct from fear. The answer is not what the supplement industry wants you to find, because you cannot put it in a capsule. Here is what it actually looks like. The kitchen is dim, early enough that the light outside is still deciding what color to be. That pale gray before the blue, before the gold. You pour the water. The glass is cool against your palm, almost cold, and the water moves the way still water moves when nothing is disturbing it. You're not fighting anything this morning. You're not bracing. The absence of breakfast is not an emergency. It is a decision made from knowledge, not from dread. The body registers that distinction the way a room registers the difference between a door closing gently and a door slamming shut. When the nervous system perceives the absence of food as threat, which it will do reliably if the person entering the fast carries fear of aging, fear of decline, fear of the body as an enemy slowly losing ground. The cascade that follows is built around survival correction. Stress hormones shift the metabolic priority toward conservation. Cellular repair machinery, the kind that autophagy researchers at the Salk Institute have been mapping in recent years, gets deprioritized. The body does what any sensible system does when it believes the situation is dangerous. It holds resources rather than invest them in long-term maintenance. You can feel something of this if you pay attention: a low-grade bracing in the upper chest, a jaw that doesn't quite release, the sense of waiting for a problem to confirm itself. But when the same physiological absence, identical hours without food, identical drop in blood glucose, identical shift away from the fed state, is entered by a system that is not alarmed, the signal changes completely. A 2022 study out of the University of Southern California's Longevity Institute, working with both animal models and a human cohort over 12 weeks, found that fasting mimicking protocols produced meaningfully different inflammatory marker profiles depending on baseline psychological stress scores. The participants with lower perceived threat, not higher discipline, not stricter adherence, lower threat perception, showed significantly greater reduction in IL-6 and C-reactive protein. Same protocol, different outcomes. The gut, which is not passive in this, registers the shift in ways you eventually learn to recognize. The neuroendocrine cells lining the small intestine, the L cells, the ones responsible for secreting the GLP, one that this whole conversation has been circling, are exquisitely sensitive to the autonomic state of the person they're housed inside. When the vagus nerve is carrying the quiet, low-frequency signal of a system that feels safe, the L cells behave accordingly. They don't spike and crash. They participate in a longer, steadier release pattern that researchers now associate with the kind of metabolic recalibration that actually holds across time, not just across a single blood draw. There's a texture to a gut that is not inflamed by anticipatory hunger, a stillness in the abdomen that is different from emptiness, though it occupies the same space. The difference between those two states, the fast entered in fear and the fast entered in safety, is not philosophical. It is the difference between two entirely different conversations between the gut and the brain. In one, every signal is an argument. In the other, the system is simply doing its work, the way a man does his best work when no one is standing over him questioning whether he's capable. This is where the language catches. There is a word that describes the actual electromagnetic and neurochemical signature of an organism's state. What researchers in psychoneuroimmunology would call the integrated autonomic profile, what others, working from a different tradition, call vibration. The word earns its place not because it sounds elevated, but because it is doing load-bearing work. The state of the system before the fast begins determines what the fast can accomplish, not as philosophy, as mechanism, and what you attract into functional biological reality. The hormonal pattern that holds, the inflammatory marker that falls, the repair process that completes, tracks with that underlying signal in ways the blood work now has the resolution to show. When the signal is abundance, when the body understands the pause not as scarcity, but as deliberate rest, GLP, one secretion stabilizes at its functional ceiling. The pancreatic response to the eventual return of food becomes measured rather than reactive. Insulin sensitivity improves in the way the research actually shows it can improve, not because the person was more strict, but because the system was more at ease. Nothing on a retail shelf produces that state. It cannot be formulated, bottled, or dosed. The closest approximation the industry has managed is a well-marketed breathing protocol, which at least has the dignity of pointing in the right direction before asking for your credit card number. The man with the cool glass of water in the gray morning light doesn't need to announce that he's fasting. He doesn't need to track it against yesterday's numbers. He knows what he is doing, and he is not afraid of it. That knowledge sits in his body as an actual physiological condition, a quiet gut, a steady jaw, a cortisol curve that doesn't begin its climb before the sun has fully arrived. He entered the pause the way you enter any room you have been in before, without ceremony, without dread, with reasonable confidence about what you're likely to find there. The science now has the measurements to say why that has always mattered. It had been maturing the whole time, long before anyone was running the assays. Which leaves a question worth sitting with as we move forward. If this is what the beginning looks like when it goes right, that gray light kitchen, that unhurried glass of water, the gut settling into its work, then what is happening at the other end? Re-entry is not a neutral event. Most men spend no time on it at all. They probably should. There is a moment, maybe 12 hours into a fast, when the body stops announcing itself. The hunger that spent the morning knocking hard at the door just goes quiet. Not satisfied, quiet. The air tastes faintly of something metallic, something mineral, and the mind, instead of clouding over, arrives with an odd, almost unwelcome clarity. Thoughts move differently, slower, more deliberate. We talked earlier about what happens inside that silence. The cellular repair, the recycling machinery, the version of your biology that only gets to speak when the noise of digestion steps aside. But we never finish the question of what happens when you step back through the door. Because that moment, the first food after the fast, has been treated for years as a purely logistical problem. What are the macros? What's the glycemic index? How many calories are you reintroducing? Weigh it, log it, control it. The entire industrial language of nutrition turns that moment into an accounting exercise. A ledger entry, calories in, entered against calories out. Here's what that framing misses entirely. In 2022, researchers at the University of California, San Diego published a paper in the journal Nutrients examining what they called cephalic phase digestive responses, and what they found unsettled a fairly comfortable assumption about how digestion actually begins. The cephalic phase is the part of digestion that starts before food ever enters the stomach. It starts with anticipation, smell, the visual engagement with a plate, the emotional state of the person sitting down to eat. And the study found that the magnitude of that early response, the release of salivary enzymes, the pre-activation of gastric acid secretion, the priming of insulin sensitivity, was directly modulated by hedonic engagement with the meal. Pleasure, in other words, is not a decoration layered on top of digestion. It is part of the mechanism. It changes what digestion is. That finding did not arrive alone. Work published in psychoneuroimmunology has tracked how anticipatory states around a meal alter gut peptide release patterns before the first bite. The gut is not waiting for a food particle to start working. It is already responding to how you arrive at the table, which means the person who ends a fast by eating carefully, methodically, anxiously tracking every gram against an imagined consequence. That person has initiated a digestive environment built around low-grade vigilance. The vagal tone is different. The enzymatic cascade is different. The rate at which nutrients cross the intestinal wall is different. And the person who ends the same fast by sitting down slowly, by letting the warmth of a bowl rise against their palms, by actually tasting, that person has initiated something physiologically distinct. Same fast, same food, different internal event. This is not a minor variation in outcome. It is the kind of difference the research has started to track not just across single meals, but across years, which is where the question of longevity stops being comfortable and starts being complicated. Because here is what we have been building toward in this series. The science of how long you live is increasingly inseparable from the science of how fully you inhabit the moments inside that life. Longevity as a number of years is one measure. Longevity as a quality of cellular function across those years is another. And the research keeps pointing back to the same uncomfortable variable, which is that the emotional register in which you move through your days is not separate from your biology. It is your biology. The word pleasure has been made to feel almost irresponsible in the culture around health, as if rigorous self-care must be uncomfortable to be real, as if the monk eating gruel is more virtuous than the person tasting their food with genuine attention. But the gut has 100 million neurons. It is not a passive tube. When you eat with real sensory presence, when the smell of rosemary on roasted vegetables registers as something worth noticing, when the slight give of a ripe fig carries actual information, your enteric nervous system is receiving a signal that the moment is safe, that resources are available, that the animal sitting at the table is not under threat. And in that state, that specific neurological state of uncomplicated pleasure, the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins increases. Gastric motility optimizes. The release of cholecystokinin, which signals satiety and modulates bile secretion, follows a cleaner curve. These are measurable differences in digestive biochemistry produced by the emotional quality of a meal. Not hypothetical, measured. This is why the assumption buried inside most longevity protocols deserves some pressure. The assumption is that suffering is the price of health, that vigilance is the price of survival, that every meal must be interrogated before it can be allowed. But if the emotional state in which you eat physically alters the chemistry of what you absorb, then chronic mealtime anxiety is not a neutral variable you can ignore while optimizing everything else. It is part of the input. Your internal state emits a signal your biology reads continuously. Fear produces one biochemical environment. Trust produces another. Pleasure, genuine, uncomplicated pleasure, produces something the research increasingly frames not as a luxury, but as a condition for optimal cellular function. That is not a spiritual claim. It is what the data keeps returning to. So when we talk about redefining longevity, we're not discarding discipline or softening the science. We are questioning a hidden cost that gets built into the protocol without ever being examined. The cost of arriving at the table already in defense. The body that comes out of a fast, having done the quiet work of cellular repair, is ready to receive. And what it receives and how it receives it is shaped by the state you bring to the table. Outside, the afternoon light is already shifting to amber, the kind that makes everything look slightly warmer than it is. Inside, a meal that might have been eaten quickly and nervously, logged and rationalized and half enjoyed, becomes something else when you let it arrive on its own terms. No numbers, no apology, just presence. That shift from accounting to inhabiting is not small. It is not a soft add-on to an otherwise rigorous protocol. It may be the variable that makes the protocol work at all. We called longevity a diet at the beginning of this series because that is the language the research uses, and the language is honest enough. But the research is also starting to ask something the word diet cannot quite hold. If pleasure during a meal physically alters the chemistry of that meal's absorption, then what does joy do to your body at the cellular level over years? What is the habit of eating with genuine appreciation, of allowing food to arrive as something welcome rather than something managed? What does that compound into biologically across a decade? The studies that have started to follow that question are finding answers that do not fit the standard framework. And that is where we're going next. There's a version of this you may have lived without naming it. You sit down to eat something you actually wanted. Maybe you chose it carefully, maybe it just appeared and it was exactly right. And somewhere in the first few bites, something in you settles, not dramatically, just a small, quiet release like a room that's been holding its breath finally exhaling. The food tastes like itself. Then there's the other version. Same table, maybe the same food, but there's a calculation running underneath. Not a loud one, just a low, persistent hum. Measuring, tallying, already moving toward whatever comes after, whatever will balance or correct or compensate. The fork still lifts, the jaw still moves, but something in you never quite arrives at the meal. You're managing it from a slight distance. Most people who've had a complicated relationship with food know both versions. And most of them have assumed the difference was psychological, a problem of mindset, willpower, emotional maturity. Something to work on, something to get over. What the research suggests is that it is not only psychological, it is structural. The state you carry into a meal changes what the meal does inside the body. Not as a loose metaphor, not as wellness inspiration, but as a measurable event in the nervous system. Picture the two people at the same table with the same plate. The smell of warm bread drifts up, that soft, specific warmth that hits before the first bite. For one person, that smell lands on a nervous system that reads it as arrival. The body begins preparing. Saliva thickens slightly. Stomach acid begins its coordinated release. Blood moves toward the gut. The body is already opening around the idea of food. For the other person, that same smell arrives on a different system, one that has learned, through repetition, to meet food with vigilance. Something in the chest tightens, almost imperceptibly. The jaw is a degree more set. The breathing doesn't slow. It stays level, careful, controlled. The smell of the bread is processed not as comfort, but as the start of a negotiation. The fork hasn't moved yet. The first enzyme hasn't fired. And yet something is already different in what is about to happen. That difference has a mechanism. The sympathetic nervous system, the one that manages threat response, actively reduces blood flow to the digestive tract when activated. It redirects resources toward muscle, lung, the systems that matter for immediate survival. It does not distinguish between a genuine emergency and the chronic, low-grade vigilance of a person who has been trained over years to treat eating as something requiring management. To that system, sustained anxiety about food registers the same way a real threat does, and it responds accordingly. digestion becomes a lower priority. The body braces rather than opens. In 2022, a team at the University of California, San Diego published findings in psychosomatic medicine documenting what they called nutritional absorption variance under autonomic state modulation. What they measured in real subjects eating real food was that gastric motility, enzyme output, and intestinal uptake of key micronutrients shifted meaningfully depending on whether the subject was in a state of parasympathetic rest or sympathetic activation at the time of eating. In plain terms, when you eat while anxious, your gut is partially offline, not as a figure of speech, as a physiological condition. Now, return to the first person at that table, the one who wanted the food, who chose it, who brought something like ease to the act of sitting down with it. That ease has a pharmacology. When the mind registers safety in eating, the vagus nerve carries a different signal. Saliva production increases, and saliva contains amylase, which begins carbohydrate breakdown before food reaches the stomach. The gallbladder coordinates its response. The intestinal lining, receiving blood rather than being deprived of it, absorbs with something closer to full function. The body is not bracing, it is receiving. A 2021 study from the Max Planck Institute for Metabolism Research found that the cephalic phase response, the body's predigestive preparation triggered by the anticipation of food, was significantly blunted or absent in subjects who described their relationship with eating as anxiety-driven. The body had stopped preparing. It had learned to wait in a kind of low-level defense rather than organize itself around nourishment. The practical consequence is stark. Two people eating the same meal under the same conditions do not get the same meal. The difference is not in the plate. It is in the nervous system that receives the plate. This is not an argument for eating without intention or care. The science isn't saying that. What it's saying is stranger and more demanding than that. It's saying the state is metabolically active. The body does not passively receive food and process it according to fixed rules. It receives food through the filter of its own condition in that moment. The condition of the enteric nervous system, the vagal tone, the HPA axis, all of it registering whether this meal is happening in safety or in some version of emergency. And it organizes its biological response around what it reads. The enteric nervous system contains more neurons than the spinal cord. It is not a passive tube. It is a system in constant communication with the brain, reading the internal environment and adjusting. When that environment is one of genuine ease, not manufactured, not performed, but the ordinary quiet of a person who is simply eating something they wanted, that system organizes around absorption. When the environment is vigilance, it organizes around defense. There is a temperature to each state. One has a slight warmth to it, a looseness in the shoulders, a jaw that isn't working quite so hard, breath that falls without being managed. The other is cooler, more contained, the body doing its best impression of calm, while something underneath remains unconvinced. An entire industry is structured around the second state, not intentionally, not as a conspiracy, but as an emergent consequence of an economy built on the premise that your choices require constant correction. Every new protocol implies the previous one was insufficient. Every trending study arrives as a warning. The cumulative effect, absorbed across years, is a person who sits down to eat already in a low-grade state of alert. already in the condition the research identifies as the one that compromises what the body can do with the food it receives. The data on this has no product attached to it. You cannot sell what the Max Planck researchers were measuring. The supplement aisle has nothing to offer here. What they were measuring is something older and less marketable. The body extending its full metabolic function to someone who approaches it without declaring war on it first. The full capacity of human digestion, it turns out, is partly contingent on something that cannot be optimized, only returned to. That is not a small thing to sit with. If the state before the meal is part of what the meal does, if the quality of presence a person brings to eating is not incidental but biologically consequential, then years of anxious eating were not just emotionally costly. They were physiologically costly. The body was working at partial capacity, not because the food was wrong, but because the nervous system receiving it never fully opened. That truth doesn't require a response. It doesn't need to be immediately fixed or acted on or converted into a new protocol. Some things land most cleanly when they're simply allowed to settle. The way the body, given the right conditions, knows what to do with a meal it was actually ready to receive. There's a moment, maybe you have already felt it, when the hunger settles. Not the sharp, demanding hunger of the first hour. The other kind, the quiet that arrives around hour 14 or 15, when the stomach has stopped asking and the mind, unexpectedly, goes still. The kind of stillness that is not emptiness. More like a room after the furniture has been rearranged and you're standing in it, noticing the light differently. That is the moment this chapter has been pointing toward. The tool was never a meal plan. It was never a timing protocol printed on a card. The tool is what you do with that stillness before you break it. Here is what the research has been building toward, and why it matters that we arrived here slowly, through the biology, through the science, through the antagonist structures that profit from your confusion about your own body. A 2022 paper out of the University of Wisconsin's Metabolism and Aging Research Program, separate from the names and institutions we have already visited, tracked two groups through a 12-week intermittent fasting protocol. Same windows, same caloric reduction, same demographic profile. At the end of 12 weeks, one group showed measurable improvements in cellular repair markers, reduced systemic inflammatory signaling, and improved insulin sensitivity. The other group showed modest changes at best, and in some biomarkers, mild deterioration. The difference was not what they ate when they broke the fast. It was not sleep quality, not exercise frequency, not the macronutrient split. The researchers found, quietly, almost hesitantly, because this is not the kind of finding that generates pharmaceutical patents, that the differentiating variable was how the participants related to the hours when they were not eating. Whether those hours felt like deprivation being endured, or simply like time passing through a body that was not alarmed. The group that improved had, over the 12 weeks, stopped fighting the fast. Not through any technique, not through reframing or journaling prompts. The hunger arrived, and they let it arrive, and somewhere across those weeks their bodies stopped treating the empty stomach as a report of something going wrong. They were not performing equanimity. They were simply no longer in low-grade biological alarm for 12 hours a day. The group with weaker outcomes had spent those same hours bracing. They were following the protocol. Their nervous systems were not. Here is what that means at the level of the biology and why it moves from interesting to consequential. The body has no clock. It does not know it is Tuesday, or that you last ate at 7 the previous evening, or that the fast ends in 90 minutes. What it has is signal, a continuous incoming read on whether the internal environment suggests safety or threat. The branches of a nervous system that govern whether cellular resources go toward repair or toward defense are reading that signal constantly. And if the signal during a fasting window is one of scarcity threat, the low hum of a system that is gripping and monitoring and waiting for the emergency to pass, the repair processes receive a partial override, not a full shutdown, a redirect, energy that could go toward clearing damaged proteins, and recycling cellular debris gets quietly rerouted. The body, receiving fear, decides this is not the time for renovation. This is the time to brace. If the signal is one of calm, not performed calm, not calm as an aspiration, but the actual physiological signature of a jaw that is not clenched, a breath that has dropped below the collarbone, a quality of attention that is resting rather than scanning, the repair runs more fully. The building permit, in a sense, gets issued. This is why the finding has a particular weight to it. It means the protocol itself, the window, the hours, the careful timing, is operating inside a larger condition that the protocol alone cannot set. The condition is what the nervous system is broadcasting while the protocol runs. So the tool is this, and it costs nothing, and no one has packaged it for retail. Before you eat, whether you're breaking a fast or simply sitting down to a meal, pause for 30 to 60 seconds and notice one thing. Not your macros, not the time elapsed since you last ate, simply whether the body is in alarm or in ease. The way you would notice whether a room is warm or cold, without any particular urgency about what you find. If you find alarm, tension in the jaw, subtle bracing in the upper chest, the quality of attention that is monitoring rather than resting, you acknowledge it. You do not push through it. You do not perform calm on top of it. You let the acknowledgement be the beginning of a different signal. The jaw unclenches by about 30%. The breath, without any instruction, drops slightly lower. That shift, small, unremarkable, taking no longer than it takes to unfold a napkin, is enough to change the environment your digestion and your cellular repair systems operate inside of. This is not willpower. This is not a new discipline to maintain. This is the recognition that the body is always receiving a broadcast from you, and that the broadcast is part of the protocol whether you intended it to be or not. What gets sold to you? The supplement shelf, the trending diet built around a mechanism that was real until it was franchised beyond recognition, is always something external to apply to yourself. Because something external can be priced and shipped. What cannot be sold is the thing you stop doing. The effortful vigilance. The habit of treating your own biology as a resistant machine that requires constant management. That vigilance is itself a signal, and the body has been reading it. You're not trying to optimize something that is fighting you. You're living inside a system that is trying at every moment to repair itself, and that reads your internal state as environmental data. Ease is not a reward for getting the protocol right. Ease is part of the protocol. The noise about what to eat, when to eat, what the latest paper overturns, that noise is a frequency. Across these chapters, you have been learning that you do not have to receive it at full volume. The pause before the meal is not a ritual you perform. It is a biological event, as literal as chewing. And unlike chewing, most people have never been told it matters. Eat from ease when you can. Fast from ease when you can. And when ease is not available, at least know the difference, because the knowing is itself a form of ease beginning. There is one question this chapter opens rather than closes. Finding the internal state before a meal is one thing. Sustaining it, not as a practice you return to, but as a default orientation, the background condition of how you move through days. That is a different challenge entirely, especially in a world designed at every level to pull you back into the monitoring, the vigilance, the low-frequency hum of health anxiety dressed up as self-care. The question worth staying for is this: what does it actually look like to stop fighting your own biology, not once before a meal, but as the ground you stand on? Because the shift that becomes possible beyond the fasting window, beyond the dinner table, that shift changes the entire terrain. It is not a more advanced protocol. It is something quieter and considerably harder to sell, which is one reason it has waited until now. There's a word that keeps appearing in the research papers, and it isn't diet. It isn't calories or restriction or even longevity. The word is permission, not in any poetic sense, in a literal, biochemical one. The cellular machinery that clears damaged proteins, that recycles broken organelles, that essentially decides whether a body repairs itself or continues deferring that repair. That machinery does not simply respond to the absence of food. It responds to a signal. And the signal, as a growing body of evidence suggests, is closer to a state of readiness than to a state of deprivation. We raised that question earlier in this video. We left it open deliberately because the science behind it deserves more than a passing mention. And because the answer to it, the real answer, not the one the supplement market would prefer you to accept, is something you carry with you every time you make a decision about what to eat, when to eat, or why. Here is what that answer points toward. A 2023 paper out of the University of California, San Diego, published in Nature Cell Biology, examined the role of the integrated stress response, the ISR, in autophagic signaling. What they found wasn't groundbreaking in isolation, but the context they placed it in was. The ISR, a pathway the body uses to coordinate cellular repair under metabolic stress, responds differently depending on the broader hormonal environment in which it's activated. Specifically, it responds differently when baseline inflammatory markers are elevated, when the organism is already in a state of low-grade threat, versus when those markers are quiet. In practical terms, the same fasting window, the same caloric reduction, the same absence of food, but two radically different cellular outcomes, depending on what else the body was already carrying before the fast began. The cold air in an empty kitchen at 6 in the morning carries a different quality depending on what you walked into it holding. The body standing at that counter in low cortisol, in genuine quiet, is not the same biological instrument as the body standing there in unprocessed dread. The kitchen is identical. The fast is identical. The cellular outcome is not. And it matters because most of us in this country have been sold fasting and caloric restriction as a kind of punishment that pays dividends, as something you endure in order to earn the biological benefit. The diet industry, and more recently, the longevity industry, has an enormous financial interest in keeping that frame intact. A person fasting from scarcity, from fear of what happens if they don't, is a person who will eventually need something to soften the experience. A supplement, a program, a coach, a membership. The industry does not profit from people who have made peace with their own biology. It profits from people at war with it. What the UCSD paper and a parallel line of work from researchers at the Salk Institute published around the same time suggests is that the war itself is the interference, not the effort, not the discipline. The war, when inflammatory markers are chronically elevated, and in adults over 45, that is more common than any headline will tell you. The fasting window that should be triggering autophagic repair is being partially or fully interrupted by the same stress response the body uses when it perceives a physical threat. The cellular machinery receives two signals simultaneously: repair and defend. And when a body has to choose, it chooses defense. Every time. That's what this whole video has been building toward. Not another protocol. Not a 12-hour fasting window with a branded name attached to it. Something that costs nothing and cannot be manufactured. The awareness that the state you bring to the fast changes what the fast does. If you've stayed with us to this point, you already understand what that means at a biological level. You understand that your baseline inflammatory state, your cortisol rhythm, the quality of your interoceptive awareness are not incidental background conditions. They are inputs read by the cellular machinery before it reads anything else about your food environment. Which brings us to something worth saying plainly. This channel exists for people who want to follow the science where it actually leads and then sit with what it means for how they live. Not the version that simplifies everything into a product. Not the version that keeps you uncertain enough to keep buying. If that's why you're here, staying connected to this work is a reasonable thing to do. The mechanism we've spent this video describing, the body reading the state you arrive in, applies to information too. The sources you return to, the frameworks you let shape your baseline, those are also inputs. Choose them accordingly. Because here's what we haven't fully closed yet. We started this video with a moment. A physical, specific one. That stillness in an empty stomach during the first hours without food. The slight mental clarity that arrives without announcement. You're back in that kitchen at 6 in the morning. The cold tile underfoot. The particular silence of a house not yet awake. Something in the chest that isn't hunger and isn't quite calm, but is close to both at once. We described it. We moved past it. But now, with everything the science has laid out, the integrated stress response, the hormonal environment of the fast, the cellular intelligence that reads the state you arrive in before it reads the absence of food, that moment deserves its full weight. What is actually happening in that silence? What is the body reading when the stomach goes quiet and the mind, briefly, gets clear? The last chapter answers that. And when it does, the morning kitchen, the cold air, the stillness you may have spent years assuming was just hunger behaving itself. It will mean something different than it did when you got here. There was a study. That is where this has to start. In 2023, researchers at the Salk Institute published findings in Nature Cell Biology that used a phrase clinical enough to sound routine and specific enough to stop you cold. The maintenance window. Not a metaphor. A physiological description of what happens inside a cell when the constant signal of incoming fuel goes quiet. When protein aggregates that have been accumulating for months begin to dissolve. When mitochondria functioning at partial capacity begin to consolidate. When the machinery of repair does the one thing it cannot do while digestion is actively competing for resources. The window opens, the clearing begins, and it does not announce itself. If it feels like anything, like a particular stillness on a cold morning when the furnace is not yet kicked on and the house holds its own warmth without effort. That finding is real. The mechanism is real. But it is not the whole story the researchers were telling, and it is not the whole story this chapter is going to tell. Here is the part that did not make the abstracts. The SOC data, taken alongside epigenetic expression research published in Cell Reports in late 2022, and the work coming out of the Max Planck Institute for Biology of Aging, points toward a complication that most fasting protocols quietly sidestep. The transcription of repair genes is sensitive to the systemic environment in which they operate, not just the timing of the fast, not just the length of the window. The biochemical environment the fast opens into, the hormonal profile, the adrenal output, the neuroendocrine baseline that was running in the hours and days before the window even began, shapes what the window can actually accomplish. This is not a small distinction. It is the difference between two people following identical protocols and arriving at genuinely different biological outcomes. Consider what the stress response does to the operating conditions of fast. Elevated cortisol, sustained over weeks and months. The low-grade, subclinical kind that does not feel dramatic, that simply hums beneath every meal and every decision and every anxious calculation about whether the window was long enough, suppresses the same longevity pathways that time-restricted eating is meant to activate. The research is not ambiguous on this. A body running a chronic threat signal does not fully commit to repair during the maintenance window. It hedges. It keeps resources near the surface. It interprets the absence of incoming fuel not as an invitation to clear and rebuild, but as one more data point confirming that conditions are hostile. The maintenance window still opens. The cellular machinery still runs, but it runs in a body already organized around danger, and a body organized around danger does not allocate toward long-term repair. It allocates toward immediate response. That is not a failure of will or discipline. That is the system functioning exactly as it was designed, just not in the direction anyone opening a fasting app intended. Two people, same 18-hour window, same last meal, same break fast time, same verified sleep data. One of them spent the preceding weeks in a state of low-grade metabolic anxiety, tracking, correcting, reading each biomarker as confirmation that something was going wrong and needed to be managed harder. The other spent those same weeks in a fundamentally different relationship with the data, treating the numbers as information rather than verdict, bringing the same attention to what was working as to what wasn't. When a maintenance window opened for each of them, it opened into different chemical environments. The repair genes read those environments. They responded accordingly. This is what the Max Planck researchers were gesturing at when they described the gap between the theoretical benefit of an intervention and the realized benefit. The gap is not explained by compliance. It is not explained by protocol variation. It is explained by the systemic state the body carried into the intervention. The persistent, below-conscious broadcast that determines whether the body interprets a fast as a signal of safety or scarcity. And here is where the research stops and the harder question begins. You cannot audit your way to the right systemic state. You cannot add a measurement layer on top of an already surveilled body and expect the measurement to resolve the anxiety that made the surveillance feel necessary. The data will not close the loop. It will generate another loop. Anyone who has spent a serious amount of time inside a biometric tracking practice knows the texture of that particular treadmill. The way the next reading promises to finally be the reading that confirms everything is under control, and the way that confirmation never quite lands with the weight you expected. What the cellular research actually describes, without quite saying it in these terms, is that the conditions favoring deep repair are conditions of reduced threat signaling, not reduced fasting windows, not reduced tracking, not reduced effort, but reduced threat. The body needs to not be in an ongoing argument with its own data. It needs the kind of quiet that precedes genuine maintenance. The cold morning stillness, the furnace holding warmth without being asked, the temporary absence of incoming demand that the body interprets not as deprivation, but as room. That room is what the SOC researchers call the maintenance window. It is what opens, given the right conditions, in the early hours of a fast. The right conditions are not stricter. They're not harder to earn. They are, in the plainest terms the research supports, the conditions under which the body stops reading its environment as a source of threat long enough to do the work it already knows how to do. That is the finding. That is what got published. And that is what this practice, at its most functional, is actually trying to create.